Joining me now is Lord John Alderdice. He is in the House of Lords. He is also Chairman, Centre for Democracy and Peacebuilding in Belfast and Director of International Dialogue and Initiative in the UK. Thanks for being with us today.
You're
Appreciate
welcome.
it. You're no stranger to conflict. Northern Ireland had conflict for many, many, many decades. How were people able to come together, Catholics and Protestants, and finally put the conflict behind them and decide that peace was going to be the new road?
I think the first thing was that people who were involved in the violence itself, I mean people in the leadership of the IRA, for example, loyalist paramilitaries to some extent, and British Army and security services, came to the conclusion that they couldn't win. They couldn't be beaten on either side, and they couldn't win. Mm-hmm. And I remember doing a piece of work in Iraq with leaders there, with Martin McGuinness, and it was very interesting what he said about it. He said, look, when we came to the conclusion that we could not beat the Brits, albeit they couldn't beat us, I had an ethical problem. I was sending my young friends out to be injured, imprisoned, possibly killed, knowing that there was going to be no successful outcome. Mm-hmm. And therefore we had to find another way, and the other way was a political way. So the first thing was people coming to the point of feeling that physical force was not going to bring a result. The second thing was that the external stakeholders came to a new set of relationships. So the British government and the Irish government joined the European community on the same day in 1973. They started meeting with each other and talking about things. They started engaging in a friendly, constructive way, which had not been the historic relationship between Britain and Ireland. And finally, you got a Prime Minister, John Major, a Taoiseach, Albert Reynolds, who had both been finance ministers in the European community together. They became Prime Minister, and Albert Reynolds rang up John Major and said, look, we can do something on this together. And John Major said, I don't know that we can, Albert, but if you say so, we'll have a go. And so there was a whole process that developed over, and of course, some of it, the Anglo-Irish Agreement, so on, preceded even those leaders. So this business of internal exhaustion, you might say, or recognition of the limits of physical force, and the external coming together of relations between the major stakeholders, assisted by the European Union and indeed by our friends in the United States of America.
And the peace is holding.
And the peace is holding. There are two separate elements that are really important to semi-disentangle. One is the peace process and the other is the political process. The peace process is not fundamentally about agreement. It's about finding ways to disagree with each other without killing each other. And so unionists are still unionists, and nationalists are still nationalists, and Republicans are still Republicans, and loyalists are still loyalists. But we now find that we can disagree quite radically, but democratically. And ultimately, it will be for the people to decide by a democratic process. The politics, that's complicated, it's difficult, it goes up and down, sometimes you almost despair of it. That doesn't make it that difficult different from politics in a lot of other places, but it's a different thing. And we're in no danger at the moment of going back to war, but we are in a bit of a messy place politically.
Right. Now, the Spirit of Humanity Forum, what do you see as the essence of this forum to promote peace globally, to bring it beyond Reykjavik and Iceland, which is a peaceful place? What elements do you see here that were able to be formed in Northern Ireland that brought peace?
I think one of the things that I detect in this kind of group of people is an appreciation that it is about building better relationships between groups of people. It's not fundamentally just a sort of socioeconomic power question. It's about building relationships. This was one of the key lessons of the Irish peace process. In fact, the whole process was built on addressing three key sets of relationships between Protestants and Catholics in the North, between the North and the South, and between Britain and Ireland. And most peace processes aren't constructed that way. They're constructed on the basis of power games. And I think that's one of the reasons our process was successful. That's the first thing. The second thing is that I hear from people here a wish to find a new way of thinking about and understanding our problems in order to, talk about changing the paradigm. And I hear that in a lot of young people and indeed older people in various communities, that we need to understand things in a different way if we're going to get a better outcome. That's not necessarily as smooth a road as some of the people here would like to think. 500 years ago, we had the Reformation. This is the 500th anniversary, around and after the time of the Enlightenment. These were really important steps forward in human understanding, but they were also very violent. There was a lot of trouble at the time. So one of the messages I have for people here is, I'm absolutely with you as we try to find a new way. But even if we are able to do so, it will not be a smooth ride. There will be people who will be very negative about it and maybe even very violent about it. And we're living in a very violent and dangerous world at the moment. I suppose the third thing is that in political life, especially in the West, in fact, almost exclusively in the West, there's been a wish to believe that you can separate off what one might very broadly describe as the spiritual element of humanity and put that in the private space and say, but you can think whatever you like, but in the public space, we're going to separate that either by formal separation of powers, like in the United States, or by the conventions of what you say and don't say, like in the United Kingdom, and so on. I don't think that's possible. I think that what is moving to you at every level of being a human being as an individual and as part of a community and group influences, impacts, and affects how you conduct yourself. The fact that there's a formal separation of powers in the United States does not mean that religion does not have an impact on the politics of the United States.
Of course.
In fact, even more so than in Britain, where the head of state is the head of the church. So those formal structures don't put it away. Therefore, understanding what that's about and finding ways as a human race of taking steps forward in our understanding of this dimension of being a human being. And a dimension of being a human being as part of a group, not just as an individual. And I think these folk have that sense and have that drive. And for me, therefore, it's a really enriching thing to engage with them on that.
Resetting the compass is basically what they've talked about, the Spirit of Humanity Forum. Is it possible to reset the compass so that more people can be at peace, so that we can see less conflict in the world?
I was just saying to some of the folk, if you're talking about violent conflict, yes, I think we can do things. But all of us have conflicts inside ourselves. At one and the same time, you love your children and you're completely furious with them for doing this and this. And the important thing about being a parent is not that you don't have that angry, furious side to you, but that you find a way of containing it and transforming it into a strong relationship that can cope with it. You want to be a good enough parent, not a perfect parent. Perfect parents are a disaster, right? You want to be a good enough parent whose child learns how to cope with difficulties and problems and disappointments, but doesn't have so many disappointments that they're not able to manage, develop themselves. So it's not for me, which is a bit different, I think, from some of the folk here, it's not for me about getting rid of conflict. There will always be conflict in that sense. But we don't need to be killing each other. We don't need to be in violent political conflict. We don't need to be in violent relationships as individuals or as communities. But the idea that we're going to get to a place where everything will be harmony, sweetness and light and nobody's going to have bad feelings about anybody, it's actually dangerous to think about that as an ambition, because it means that you blot out from your thinking some crucial aspects of the human spirit and the human existence.
What do you bring back to Ireland from this event?
I think what I will bring back is having had a few days space with other people devoted to finding a better way. And in my world of politics and even of academic life, you don't get that many spaces for reflective thought with good, thoughtful people with the right sort of instincts. So that's one kind of element I will take back. And there are people here who have experiences that are really good to engage with and to learn from. Hopefully one brings some things that one has learned from one's own experience, but that's only really able to be valuable if you can engage in the conversations and learn from the experience of others, either in other places of conflict or in other places that have resolved their conflict.
So one positive experience can grow into a multitude of positive experiences.
Absolutely. And I would add to that, if we want to make change in our world and make it a better place, the management advice would be set up all sorts of structures and plans and mission statements and all this kind of stuff. Well, fine if you want to run a business. If you want to change the way whole communities think, you need to be able to inspire people with new ways of thinking about things. You need to have the vision, the idea, and then the passion to get it out there. I don't detect any shortage of passion amongst any of the people here. And we now, of course, have the technology to get it out there in social media and elsewise. I think we're edging towards developing a new set of understandings. I hear religious leaders here and in other places talking about the need for a new theology that takes them beyond their own religious tradition. Quite a dangerous thing for them to suggest. I hear a lot of politicians despairing of where we're at in liberal democracy and saying, you know, maybe we need to think about how we take the next step in our progress as a race, in how we govern ourselves in a more constructive and thoughtful way. I hear a lot of people concerned about how we manage the economy and wondering, can it not be run in a way that is better than the way we've been running it, or the traditional ways of thinking about it. So that's the thing that, and it's not all going to happen this weekend. It's about the steps forward. And maybe it will be somebody here, or maybe it will be somebody here that will talk to somebody somewhere else, and an idea will be born. And that's really what will fire us up over the next generation or so.
Final question. You're in the House of Lords. You're in Parliament. Britain is leaving the EU. You've got indications that Scotland might hold a vote and become independent. The Welsh are also talking about the same. Even Northern Ireland, perhaps joining the rest of Ireland. We seem to be growing more conflict, not less, in your country.
I think that's true everywhere. And I think it's really important when people think about what's happening in our country, or in the United States, or in parts of Africa, or of course in the Middle East, that we're aware that what is affecting us in each of our countries is a global phenomenon. And to understand and get into understanding that global phenomenon, which you're absolutely right, is a fragmentation of a fear of complexity and a pulling back to simplicity, a simplicity which, and a certitude about things you can't be certain about, when the reality is the world is a complex place. And I think it's complicated because I'm having to deal with all of these people. I just pull back and deal with our people who have the same views and the same instincts. It won't work, but we're in that frame of mind at the moment. And I hope that although it's clear Britain will leave the European Union, that doesn't necessarily mean that we can't ensure good relationships with each other. The European Union grew out of a very specific experience in Europe, which was repeated wars which became world wars, especially the conflict between France and Germany. Britain was not in the European community at the start. It really came in for economic reasons. But if it was to happen that France and Germany started to pull apart in the European Union, that would be a wholly other ballgame. And I hope it's possible. I'm a Remainer, but I also recognise political reality. And so the thing for Britain now is to get the best arrangement we can, especially with Ireland, but as far as possible with the rest of the European Union, but also to contribute in a positive way so that as far as possible Europe does not disintegrate. That's not in anybody's interests.
Do you see anyone that you would consider to be a moral authority today that can help all of the peoples of the world to kind of change the paradigm, reset the compass? Do you see anything like that?
Actually, the place where I see some of the most striking things, and it's not the only place, but as I listen to Pope Francis, as I listen to the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, as I listen to the former Chief Rabbi of Britain, Lord Sachs, and as I listen to some leaders in the Muslim world who are challenging extremism, I actually find more of a challenge to the status quo, more of a, in religious terms, we might talk about a prophetic role for religious leaders, which has been sort of dismissed, particularly in Western statescraft, for a long time. But I begin to hear those kinds of voices. And it's not that they have a simple answer to complex questions, but they have inspirational characters, which I think we do well to listen to. And they certainly give me hope.
Okay. Excellent.
You're very welcome.
Thank you very much.